Substance use is really hard to talk about. There's often a lot of lying, a lot of sneaking around, a lot of shame, a lot of feelings of hurt. Usually, we find that ADHD symptoms are actually really easy to talk about. It can be a relief to discuss them. It's a place where we can create connection and a foundation.
Welcome to Flood for Love of Recovery, where I'm your host, Dominique Zazier. Sibling relationships can be so unique, but they can become more complex when there's drug or alcohol use involved. If you find yourself questioning how to help, you're not alone. Every month, we bring together stories that empower you to better navigate your sibling's addiction, offer a sense of connection, and provide fresh perspectives on understanding substance use and how to protect your peace. Join me on this journey in restoring hope and healing. It's October, and in light of ADHD Awareness and Substance Abuse Prevention Month, we're going to dive deep into the connection between undiagnosed or untreated ADHD in adolescents, a link that's often missed, but affects nearly half of adolescents in substance use treatment. And to help bring clarity as to why substance use is often a side effect of untreated ADHD, we have Shelby Robbins with us to answer some of the most pressing questions and to share tips to help recognize and manage each disorder. Shelby is the founder and CEO of Antelope Recovery, a virtual treatment center dedicated to helping adolescents and young adults navigate a range of mental health issues, including substance use and ADHD. So Shelby, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's very exciting to talk about this topic. And before we really dive into discussing the correlation between ADHD and substance use, I'd love to hear a little bit from you on what inspired some of the adolescent-focused work at Antelope Recovery.
Antelope Recovery is an organization that focuses exclusively on teen mental health and substance use disorder. Adolescence is a really special and unique time in our lives. Typically, mental health challenges and struggles and addiction presents really differently in teenagers than in children or adults. Personally, there's a lot of reasons why I'm really interested in adolescence. I think being a teenager was really challenging for me, and I know for many of my friends and family members. So getting to focus on this time in our lives that I think for many people is really a struggle is super rewarding. However, I have many loved ones, very close family members with substance use and ADHD challenges. Working with their substance use challenges was almost impossible until we were able to get an ADHD diagnosis and actually address that first. So for me, seeing that cycle of addiction and being in that chaos in my home and things like 12 steps and traditional addiction treatment just not working for them at all. And then the complete shift once that ADHD was addressed was really impactful. And then, in my work, one of the first things I usually look for when working with a kiddo who's struggling with substance use is maybe there's some low-hanging fruit or some other ways we can kind of get our foot in the door with that family, with that youth, before going after that big beast of substance use can be so challenging. To me, it was really impactful as a huge breakthrough, and I think really allowed us to create more calm and love and peace at home once we were able to really get on the same page with the ADHD symptoms.
It makes total sense. You had a family member that you guys helped to get ADHD diagnosis first before treating the substance use. Was there a light bulb moment where you realized, the ADHD must be part of the root cause towards this person's substance use? Or was it more of someone had shared that insight with you before that light bulb moment went off?
So I have a sibling and a parent, both who have ADHD diagnoses. I was so young and kind of self-absorbed at the time. I think with my sibling in particular, there was just so much kind of chaos happening in her mind that, we were all just so confused by. It was how do we help her? She's in so much suffering and pain. And I think getting that ADHD diagnosis, I think it was a teacher actually who recommended my parents do that. And I think they were noticing just some of those classic ADHD symptoms showing up in school. And that was really helpful. So,
When my brother was about, I think he was like 14 or 15 at the time. So he must have been like a freshman or
mhm,
maybe even sophomore, like early high
mhm,
school. And he was diagnosed with
mhm.
ADHD, which I think is a little late for some teenagers. I know a lot of people try to get
Uh-huh.
diagnosed in like elementary, middle school if possible. High school can be a little late. I mean, better late than never, but and I remember
Mhm.
my brother being put on a medication and he
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, like, I don't like the way this makes me feel." And like over time, like eventually led to his substance use. And it's something that I hear
Mhm.
more and more when I have conversations like this one. And what I want to know is like one for people who might not be aware, what exactly is ADHD and what is the general correlation between ADHD and substance, especially if there hasn't been an ADHD diagnosis at a younger age?
Yeah, that's so funny. My sister, she was diagnosed much later on, which is rare and unique. Yeah, so what is ADHD? ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that's characterized by persistent patterns of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. And each of those three symptoms play out really differently over time. So it looks really different in young children, in adolescents, and adults. And they typically present really different with males and females. I think as far as the correlation between ADHD and substance use, it is staggering. Between 30 to 50% of adolescents who are struggling with substance use disorder do also have an ADHD diagnosis. There's a few theories about why. I think the primary one is there is a genetic correlation with ADHD. It is heritable, it goes through time, and similar with addiction. So, if you have ADHD and a substance use disorder, it is very likely you have a sibling, a parent, a grandparent, or aunt or uncle who is also struggling with those two similar things. That's just one of the first things to know, I think, when doing like a comprehensive diagnosis or evaluation. That's one of the first things you'll be asked is, do you have a family member who struggles with these things? And if you do, it's okay, we might be in the ballpark of this is what's going on. There is some new research that's come out about dopamine dysregulation in the brain and certain parts of the brain specifically that affect both attention, our ability to focus, and the craving for dopamine in external ways. So that could be through sugar, video games, or through a substance. That's one of the main kind of theories about why ADHD and substance use are correlated is because there's that dopamine deficit in the brain that people are either self-medicating to try to increase dopamine so that they can focus. And you'll hear people say a lot, I just want to feel normal. I just want to feel like that peace inside.
Makes me think about children in general, where I think a lot of the times, quote, bad behavior or misbehaved children can be mistaken for children who
Mhm.
maybe just don't care about rules or boundaries or anything like that. But a lot of the times they might be just like trying to figure out how to deal and cope with their ADHD. And they might be at such a vulnerable age where they don't even know what's going on for them.
Yeah.
Like I've seen that a lot where it's like
Mhm.
kids might be chasing like the next most exciting thing because that's whatever their brain can actually grasp onto. Like that's what's most interesting to them at the moment. So that dopamine
Mhm.
correlation makes total sense, especially as we
Yeah.
start talking about substance use or other forms of addiction and whatever spikes that dopamine for them. Those adolescents become young adults and eventually become older. How do some of those symptoms begin to change, or how do their behaviors start to evolve?
So, I think with hyperactivity, with young adults and children, what that can look like is like constant fidgeting, not being able to sit still or interrupting people. In adulthood, usually we see that shift from like a physical restlessness to more of an irritability, an impatience, or a need to constantly be busy or like fuss with little things here and there. And there's just that inability to kind of sit still. So the symptoms kind of mature as the person matures. Similar with impulsivity in teenagers, that might look like extreme risk taking behavior, like driving recklessly, experimenting with substance use. In adults, it might be frequently changing jobs or impulsive spending. It's that same symptom will just be expressed through more adult contexts rather than like a traditional teen kind of context for that to play out.
And it's interesting, like these kids are at such a vulnerable point in their life, and less
Mhm.
parents are really aware of what's going on and understanding or resources to address it or treat it. A lot of people might feel alone in this situation. And you made a great point earlier. It's like when young adults or teenagers are being brought in and they might have a substance use and there might be ADHD, and you're asking, is there a sibling or a parent or other family member that has ADHD? If their ADHD is undiagnosed, they might not even know that that is a possible challenge that they could be dealing with too. So there's so many like deep layers to this around understanding what it is, correctly diagnosing, correctly treating before you even get to the substance use if there is one, right?
It's really challenging and the mental health and substance use fields really aren't that equipped for working with co-occurring diagnoses either. And I think that really compounds the issue. In most counseling schools, you go on one or the other track where either you're working with mental health or you're working with substance. And there's very little crossover in that training. So, yeah, it's really challenging for parents and then for providers as well on the other side. Most people who are really trained in working with substance use disorder have no training in ADHD and don't know what it is or even how to guide the parents in getting the right support. It really takes a comprehensive team providers to really make progress there. So,
Yeah, like you said, a lot of collaboration. Like
yeah,
it's really insane to think like
yeah.
substance use and mental health that they're being treated independently and rather than holistically. I mean, it might seem obvious to some and maybe less apparent to others, but they seem like things that would naturally go hand in hand. I think a huge challenge in the mental health space, but also just like in the healthcare industry. But that's another beast for another day.
Oh, yeah.
When there's an undiagnosed or untreated ADD or ADHD in an adolescent, how does that actually hinder their ability to regulate their emotions and actually form healthy bonds and relationships throughout adulthood?
Mhm. Yeah. So we can go back to those three general symptoms of ADHD. So hyperactivity, inattention, and impulsivity. So, as far as how ADHD can inhibit healthy emotional regulation or healthy attachment as someone grows up and matures, I think each of those three symptoms play into that in different ways. With inattention, you might see teenagers struggling to pay attention to what their friends are saying. They might have a really hard time listening. They usually will miss details in conversation, appear forgetful or bored. When I'm building a relationship with someone, I want to know that they care, that they're interested in me, that they remember details about my life. So each of these little symptoms can have an impact on others around them. I know having a sibling with ADHD, that was definitely something I felt like, do you notice me over here? Am I here for you? Like, again, she was so all over the place, and it was really hard for her to stay present and really, really listen. That's something we've been able to work on over time in our relationship, but I know I've heard that for many, many people who've struggled with ADHD symptoms that can be a big challenge. And then as far as emotional regulation, I think impulsivity is a big challenge for people with ADHD. And in general, emotional regulation requires intentional, sustained attention to your inner world so that you can calm and regulate yourself. So, having a kind of hyperactive, quick to jump into action orientation to life can make it really hard to sit there with yourself and calm yourself down. And that's hard for anyone with or without ADHD. I think it's hard for most people to emotionally regulate, especially when there's big challenges. So it just adds, one more obstacle.
As you're speaking, I can think of so many different examples in my life where I've seen my brother's ADHD like flare up, and I'm like, oh, like this is definitely his inability to do X or to do Y. Like even starting as a young kid, I remember it felt like every time he had work, he's like,
Uh-huh.
I forgot, or, I didn't think about that. He kind of presented as someone who was scatterbrained or someone who, quote, didn't care, but
Uh-huh.
it's not that he didn't care. He just
Mhm.
really couldn't focus on completing certain tasks, right? Homework was always a chore.
Yeah.
I was always helping him. So it was like painstakingly
Mhm.
long to like complete small mundane tasks, right? Or like connecting the dots for him for things that might seem apparent or obvious to others weren't as easy of a get for him. But then
Mhm.
things that did hold his
Yeah.
attention, like video games, right? He could play video games for hours, right? Because it was like that
Mhm.
dopamine, it held his attention. There's some strategy work that was interesting to him, right? So that was him as a
Mhm.
teenager. As he got older, he started, I
Mhm.
think, dealing with his substance use. There was a lot of impulsivity where it's like, I don't like the way I feel. Like, I need to go do this. Or I don't like the way this conversation is going. I'm just going to walk out. Right. So it's that inability to hold that conversation, regulate his emotions that actually impacted his relationships with me, my family, others. So it's interesting to see that natural progression from childhood, adolescence, young adult. He's 19 now. So, and just seeing how those co-occurring disorders really work together for better or for worse. So I think that's
Mhm.
a great, like
Yeah.
those 3 points that you shared are, I think, like right spot on. Like I'm able to envision them so clearly.
No, and it is really frustrating because with ADHD, there is kind of a superpower of sustained, focused hyper attention on things that are interesting or engaging to the person struggling with ADHD. So seeing that person clearly has the ability to focus sometimes, but not others, I think for loved ones, that can be infuriating, and it can be hard not to take it personally of like, my family member clearly cares about this one thing, like why don't they care about me? Is a common thing we'll see in family dynamics. I think really important for family members to do things like listen to your podcast and really educate themselves on all these disorders and symptoms can kind of play out. So we know, hey, this is not about me. This is not personal. This person's working through their own challenges here.
That's the number one thing that I think of is it's not personal as it feels, right? Whether it's their behavior, things they might say, it's like it really isn't personal, although it
Yeah.
feels like it. And I
Mhm.
agree. I think educating yourself on whatever resources are available, I think can really help build some empathy, understanding, compassion, and trying to understand where that person might be coming from or what they're struggling with before you even start getting into like treating the root cause. Let's say parents are just starting to notice that their child, or maybe it's someone's sibling or whoever it might be, there might be signs of ADHD. What is one of the first couple things that you would suggest doing in addressing their ADHD? And if they do have a substance use issue, then subsequently addressing that as well.
First and foremost, it never hurts to get help. I think kind of the sooner you get that psych evaluation, the better, just so you know what you're dealing with or not. I know they can be expensive. There's long wait lists. Again, in my experience, kind of the sooner you know and you have those kind of outside eyes, the faster you can treat it. And if things start escalating really quickly, which sometimes they do in those teen years, it's 1 month it seems like we're managing symptoms well, and then the next month it's like, whoa, the substance use or things are starting to get out of control really fast. You have that team of support available. So even if you're not going to use all that support, even if you don't want medication or your kiddo doesn't want medication right away, it's just helpful to know what your options are and have that circle of support ready just in case you need it. It's much harder to get a good diagnosis or an accurate diagnosis when co-occurring issues start happening and get really inflamed. So again, earlier the better. That way we're working on prevention than kind of a crisis
Right.
intervention state, which substance use will quickly kind of escalate into. As far as just kind of simple things you can do, one of the big things I've noticed is for families who have a family member who has ADHD and substance use, usually the substance use is really hard to talk about. There's often a lot of lying, a lot of sneaking around, a lot of shame, a lot of feelings of hurt. usually we find that ADHD symptoms are actually really easy to talk about. It can be a relief to discuss them, usually for the parents and the teen. It's a place where we can create connection and a foundation. So I think being really open and honest about, wow, you're like really struggling to pay attention to stuff. That seems really hard. Usually a teenager might feel seen by that. Of like, yeah, it is so hard. I really don't feel like I can pay attention to anything right now. Again, just creating like a shared reality around those symptoms, it can create some foundation of trust. Other easy, kind of low hanging fruit things you can do if you start noticing ADHD symptoms, again, outside of getting professional support and talking about it, is minimizing screen time. The less screen time for people with ADHD, the better. It seems to really exacerbate those symptoms. So, limiting social media, having limitations on phone use, screen use. I think the best way for parents to do that is by modeling that behavior with this is how we're going to do things in our family, and we're going to do this together. So, if your kiddo is not allowed to be on their phone during dinner, you should not be on your phone during dinner time. Having those kind of strict limitations can be so helpful just as those young minds are developing. And then the last thing is nutrition and exercise. I think nutrition and exercise helps with almost every mental health challenge, and especially with substance use, is limiting addictive foods like sugar, caffeine, making sure your kiddo has a well-rounded diet, is eating at regular times throughout the day, every day. I think the more structure and routine you have with ADHD, the more that will help ground them into the present moment and create more stability in a world that can feel really chaotic.
Absolutely. And it sounds like what I'm hearing too is just
Yeah.
like having like multiple sources of healthy channels, whether it's
Mhm.
exercise, nutrition, limiting screen time, etc. It's like not throwing yourself at just one thing. Sometimes it's food, sometimes it's,
Yeah.
like I said, video games, a
Mhm.
relationship, or whatever else it might be, whatever is the most gratifying or stimulating. But I think either having those in small quantities or just having other options, other healthy choices to resort to rather than throwing yourself all into one thing.
You're 100% right. I think providing your child with multiple ways for them to express their energy in a healthy way and get healthy dopamine, which healthy dopamine usually looks like if I do this hard work towards a goal or towards something, I then get the reward rather than cheap short term rewards like sugar or any myriad of substances that are now available to kids. So if I work really hard, I then get this reward that really helps create those healthy
Yeah,
dopamine
and it's
channels.
it's A, right? It's really about that confidence it helps to
Uh-huh.
build in that person, right?
Yeah.
The confidence that comes to
Mhm.
dopamine, and I think a lot of the times too, at least in my experience, people that I know that have ADHD or untreated ADHD tend to have lower self-confidence because they're so
Yes.
preoccupied with things that aren't really productive, but they might be fulfilling that need for dopamine. Is we talk a lot about like what parents and what other family members can do. Do you think there's anything in particular? Siblings have a very unique relationship. Sometimes that age gap is super tight, they might be a couple months apart. Sometimes, like me and my brother, we're 10 years apart. But I know it's going to vary from sibling to sibling, relationship to relationship. In general, do you think there's anything that siblings can do to really support their brother or sister's ADHD and or their substance use?
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. I was reflecting on this before being on your podcast, and it was really sweet actually thinking back to living with my sister. And for me, it was always this balance of how do I have healthy boundaries with my sibling so that I don't get dragged into the chaos too, while also getting to enjoy her and be with her, and this constant dance of getting to really celebrate our unique relationship and just hang out and have fun with her. When she did get her ADHD diagnosis, talk with her about that. Wow, it's been really hard that we haven't known what's going on and now we do, and that's amazing. And then again at the same time, it was having really strong boundaries of, you know what, I don't really want to do that with you, or I don't think this is really the best move, and really holding my
Right.
ground. in that, which can be hard. I want us to be best friends and I want to be on the same team, and having those boundaries can be really challenging as a sibling, especially if you're
Yeah.
younger.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hoping that your sister is going to be your best friend. It's like when issues like maybe mental illness or other challenges arise, it's sometimes about like managing expectations. Like, what is my relationship with my sister going to provide me? What is she actually capable of doing? What's within her reach rather than like holding someone to an expectation that they might not be able to fulfill right then and there. I've seen that with my brother. Again, like I said, my age gap with him, like I've always looked forward to, him getting older so that way we can bond over certain things. That's kind of like something that I'm craving now, right? Like maybe I don't want him to be my best friend, but I do want to have this really close sibling bond and relationship. And like part of that ADHD and
Yeah.
substance use makes it that much more challenging.
Yeah, there can definitely be a level of grief there. I've seen that in a lot of different sibling relationships of just like, wow, I guess these are the limitations of the relationship. And that's really challenging. My sister and I are really close now. I think she's managing her healing really well. I'm super proud of her and really impressed with her. And I have other family members and friends in my life where that's not the case. And grieving those relationships is hard. I remember being a young person in college, hearing people complain about their parents and calling them too much or having different dynamics and being like, wow, I wish I had that problem of, you know, having a close relationship with this person. And it can be isolating.
Yeah, there's a lot of complexities that
Yeah.
comes to those relationships, especially siblings, because I don't think there's really any relationship where they're exactly alike. So I think it is a very unique case by case situation on how sibling relationships, develop and how what those bonds look like. Are there any strategies that you think, your siblings can use or family members can use to empower their teen to take ownership of like maybe that ADHD or their substance use or even their anxiety when they're ready to start that recovery journey?
Mhm. I think taking ownership of your experience is really hard. And it's hard for all of us. I think the way to kind of move beyond the defensiveness of like, oh, no, that's not me, or oh, I'm this way because of this and this, and kind of sloughing off your experience and happens best when you see other people model how to do that in a graceful way. I want to encourage people to own their experience first. If you're a parent, you're going to have your own struggles. By owning that with your family and owning that in a graceful way, it opens the door for your kids to mirror that behavior and do similar things with their own experience. You could say, wow, I'm really stressed out. I'm having a really hard time feeling like I'm being a good mom right now. It's been really hard for me. And just making that statement, just owning that. And usually kids are like, yeah, you are having a hard time. Or like, wow, yeah, that is true.
Seeing our parents or siblings, whoever, as that specific role, oh, that's just mom, that's just dad, that's just my
Uh-huh.
aunt, my grand sibling, whoever. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, they're people
Yeah.
too. Like they usually have like their own parents or their own siblings and families and their own dynamics and stressors that they're working with.
Mhm.
And I'm not a parent, but what I've seen is like a lot of parents feel that they need to quote be like the strong person or be like the model image, but
Mhm.
by trying to be this model image, they're not actually attending to all the other areas of their life that they
Mhm.
can attend to and perpetuates like this idea of the perfect parent that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah. By doing that, you put pressure on your kids to try to be perfect, or, it closes the door for the kids to get to share that they're struggling. So I think there's a way to do that responsibly. You definitely don't want to just start dumping all your issues on your kids, but you can own it. And then, a good way to follow up might be, this is what I'm going to do about it. Like, I don't want to be stressed out. So I'm going to do this for dinner instead of making a huge feast for all of us. Or I'm going to decide not to drive you to your friend's house tonight because I'm so stressed out. I just need to be calm and chill out a little bit. And again, by mirroring, having a good relationship with our experience and taking care of ourselves, we open the door to give our kids feedback and have them actually hear it of like, wow, you're really struggling, paying attention. Like, do you agree? Like, what's going on with that? And to have them be like, Yeah, I am. And, your kids need to trust you that if they are struggling, that you're going to handle that well. Otherwise, the dialogue just gets
Yeah.
cut off. I think that's the first place to start with family relationships. It kind of all starts with you. It's really easy to want to fixate and fix and try to change the person who's struggling and make them wrong and kind of leave yourself and just fuss over them. And that usually doesn't work very well. It's doesn't feel good to be fussed over. It makes it hard for a teenager to actually honestly communicate and can lead to more sneaking and lying and hiding and shame and not wanting to be fussed over. So, withdrawing or acting out.
Probably going to hide whatever those behaviors are even more so in an effort to not be perceived as this quote problem child. And it really
Yeah.
seems like one, prioritizing your own well being and setting those healthy boundaries in all areas of your life, especially with your children, maybe even your spouse. That's how you model that healthy behavior for your child in managing their ADHD, their mental health in general, their anxiety, their substance use. It's like very foundational, right, to just their overall wellness.
Yeah. 100%. Again, I think with that, you can model like how do you approach challenges as a family? Like if someone in the family has an ADHD diagnosis, you can model like, here's how we're going to take care of this together. And here's how we're going to take care of each other. We're going to put our phones in this box over here every night. And that's our new thing. And let's try it for a month and see what happens. And, by talking about it as a family and then trying new things to see like what's going to help us like each other and like our lives more, your kids are going to feel safer to tell you about issues because they're going to trust you're going to handle it. I think trust is really what we're going for with teen mental health.
I know like sometimes
Yeah.
as teenagers get older and they start to develop more independence between 16, 18, some of those challenges start to evolve, right? It's not going to be as
Yeah.
simple as like putting your phone in a lockbox, right? It becomes harder to control and support them in a way that might have been familiar for a long time. What do you think the value is just having open and healthy dialogue and those conversations with children or with young adults as they get older. Whereas before that might not have been as much of a challenge, but now it's really starting to present itself.
I think with older teens, you got to get really clear as a parent or as an adult of like, what can I control and what can I not before having those conversations and getting really clear on what your boundaries are. So, usually, like three, maybe four big challenges that come up are curfew, the car, driving is usually a big one, and money. Kids want money, they want your money, and what are they doing with it? Well, and then I guess the phone. So, the four big kind of conflict zones and four big areas where parents do have some control. I think you got to be ready to take it away, and just stand your ground. One of the big kind of suggestions we at Antelope kind of recommend is presenting teens with options that align with what your boundaries are when you're having those heated conversations or if your kiddo is really out of control. You can take the car and here's what's going to happen if I have any sense that you're going to be out past curfew, if you're drinking and driving, or if I don't hear from you, if you don't actually check in with me at 11 o'clock. I'm going to call the police and report something, or I'm going to go to bed at this time and lock the doors, or here's what I'm
Right.
going to do. And it's up to you to make these choices and then following through with that. I think by doing that, not blaming, not accusing, and really setting your kid up to make these decisions on their own, it's treating them like an adult. I think if you're trying to control your kid, trying to make decisions for them or not giving them that agency, that's not helping them. They're not actually going to learn. They're not going to learn how to make decisions that are helpful. I think that's one of the main ways we try to set families up for success is let's create some boundaries, get really clear on what those boundaries are for you as a parent, get clear on what you can and can't control and allow your kid to make mistakes and just make sure you follow through and stay integrity with what you can control. And, you can do similar things with positive incentives like, hey, if you get these good grades, I want to give you more freedom. If you don't get good grades, you're not going to get that. And that's fine. But I think it can really take the fight out of those conversations. And again, just handing the power to the teenager of like, this is your life. You can engage with this how you want to, and I'm here to help. If you need tutoring, if you need something to meet these goals, that's on you to kind of ask for that. This is what I'm going to do as your parent in relationship to those behaviors. Kind of the more upfront you can be, the better those conversations tend to go.
I think those are spot on. And one thing that really stood out to me while you were speaking is not making idle threats. So it's not about like
Yeah.
locking your kid out. Like that's not the goal of the quote punishment or the natural consequence they're facing. It's just letting them know like if X happens, then Y will occur. And I think really being comfortable with whatever that thing is and sticking to it rather than being like, oh, like mom's going to say this thing and it's not actually going to happen, or like dad's not really going to do that thing. And I think that gives parents more power than they think that they might actually have, is really exercising their authority where they do have control. One thing I did want to think about when it comes to treatment is what are the right treatment options when thinking about addressing both addiction and their ADHD. We talked about earlier on in the episode that start to address both of those areas.
So with ADHD, I always recommend talking to and knowing a psychiatrist who can do a full psych eval. Some substance use programs provide that and some do not, but making sure you have that professional in your corner is going to be really key as you navigate ADHD. Regardless of if you decide to pursue medication or not, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is one of the best treatment options you can do for someone with ADHD. So getting really strong kind of skill building where you're focusing on, attention training and looking at your mind and strengthening your mind. Those are kind of the two best ways I think you can address ADHD. At Antelope, we usually recommend like very short but very frequent CBT sessions. So with a lot of our kiddos, we're doing 3 or 4 times a week, 30-minute quick CBT sessions with a kiddo who's struggling with ADHD. And that tends to work really well. It's, again, part of that kind of focus and attention training. With substance use, the substance use field usually looks like 12-step. So getting involved in a 12-step community, whether that's just an ongoing local recovery community that's happening, or it looks like kind of intensive treatment where you're living at a residential program, you're getting detox support, and it's more like a medicalized kind of intervention. I think for substance use, it really depends on how you approach treatment, on how far along the disorder has developed. So we see kids who are in kind of an earlier stage of experimentation. It's clear they're getting out of control and this could evolve over time, but they might not be in a full-blown addiction. We see other kiddos who are in, again, like a very severe full-blown addiction. And for them, we would 100% recommend, you need medical detox attention and you need to live somewhere for, 4 to 6 months to, again, kind of detox, get back to ground zero with your substance use. For working on ADHD and substance use at once, I think the biggest thing you can do is talk to your providers about it. How do they recommend treating both of these things? We usually look at what do we treat first based on how severe the ADHD is, not necessarily the substance use. If we look at the ADHD symptoms and they're really severe, we will focus on that first, regardless of the status of the addiction. If we make some headway here, we know that the substance use is going to dramatically calm down.
Right.
Usually that can relieve kind of the most suffering at once. Once the ADHD is at a mild to moderate kind of level, that's when we'll kind of shift focus to the substance use. If we look at the ADHD and it's kind of mild to moderate symptoms, we'll likely focus on the substance use first and really make some headway there. Substance use treatment usually involves CBT to some level, to some degree. So we'll see the reduction in symptoms of the ADHD and substance use at the same time when we focus on the substance use that way. Where you're going to really want sustained support is going to be once you're out of a treatment setting and in kind of the long-term maintenance phase. So in that like relapse prevention state, that's when you're going to want to find like an individual therapist or a group setting with a professional who understands those co-occurring issues. And again, relapse prevention and just again, really staying on top of your ADHD symptoms and, medication management from there.
Well, this is super
Yeah.
helpful, and I think provides a lot of foundational resources and wanting to support our friends and family and loved ones who might have ADHD, but may or may not have a substance use disorder. I want to close out with one, thanking you for the question, for thanking you for all these insights that you've shared, but asking you if there's one thing that a family member can do today or tomorrow, what would that one thing be?
No one knows your kid or your sibling as well as you
Yeah,
do. You know them better than anybody. The one thing I recommend is just educate yourself. Educate, educate, educate. Gobble up podcasts, read all the books. Talk to your friends who have kids who are really struggling, and then talk to your friends who have kids who are not struggling at all and ask them. So, the more research you're doing, the better you can really advocate for their unique, and beautiful self out in the world. And that's, I think, one of the best things we can do. I know it takes time. I know it's hard. I know we've all got a million other things to do. And every little bit that you learn, it'll help you really advocate for your kid and getting the best
sounds
care.
good. Yeah, definitely meeting them
Yeah.
where they are. Thank you,
Mhm.
Shelby, so much. I really appreciate you coming onto the show today and helping to shed this light on the connection between both substance use and ADHD and how families can support these challenges through conversations, empathy, and just doing some education, like you said, homework, homework, homework. So thank you again. Thanks for listening to this episode of For Love of Recovery. If you enjoyed this episode or know somebody who might, please leave a comment and share it. You can also join our Facebook group, Siblings for Love of Recovery, if you're looking to have deeper conversations around your siblings' use of drugs or alcohol. And remember, where there is hope, there is healing.